All right, another of my book discussions come from, what I find on the streets, etc. In this case, from one of the little free libraries. The one probably I like the most, it's near the park. It has a lot of turnover, and a lot of times science fiction shows up. In this case, though, it's a murder mystery, The Floating Admiral. And you see Agatha Christie here, but also Dorothy L. Sayers, G.K. Chesterton. Those are probably the three famous names. I've never heard of Sayers, so I don't know. She may be more the central driving force behind the book, but than anything else. But basically what it is, and what's so interesting about this book is it's a set of mystery writers, whodunit type writers, who are the Detection Club. Now this was written way back in 1932 and didn't come out in paperback until, I think this is in the 80s. Yes, 1980. And what's most interesting about it is actually how it was written. Essentially, one of the authors started the story off and handed the manuscript off, and then the next author worked on it from there, and it was all sort of a game, right? Like, can we make... I don't know. It reminds me a lot of Once Upon a Time, right? The storytelling game where you have cards and you try to fit them into the story that is in existence so far to try to get you to a certain point. And it's very much like that, where each author reads things, says, that's interesting, especially the early ones, starts adding more clues into the story as they go along. And I'd say the first half of the story read relatively well, given that, it was this handoff type situation. What do we have in the first half? We start off with a prologue by Chesterton. The whole thing starts by a Canon Whitechurch. And we have G.D.H. and M. Cole, I'm assuming a couple, Henry Wade, Agatha Christie, John Rode, or Rhodey. Things start getting a little weird about here. We've gone through this. This is Millward Kennedy, where the main character in the story, the main detective, the inspector, sort of changes how he is, like there's like this shift to where he becomes kind of, I don't know, surly with his underlings and kind of snotty with people in certain ways. And it just feels kind of really jarring. I don't feel like the line of the mystery is that destroyed yet. But as we continue going on, we start hitting some 39 articles of doubt where someone just lists all the things that are the knowns and unknowns, like the knowns and then the unknown being, well, why is it this way? So the clues and some suspicions and mentions about them. And then as it goes on, more clues are being added, and essentially what's happening is that the authors are kind of trying to twist the story away and give it a whodunit or whatever, but they're like adding new clues in that are pretty significant and leaving it so that usually in these whodunits you get, I don't know, maybe I'm just used to the Sherlock Holmes, but I certainly have read a fair amount of Agatha Christie, and I need to think who else. Well, I don't know. probably a lot of loose ones. My mom was really into Agatha Christie when I was fairly young. Like, able to remember already, but maybe not like I feel like I became mentally formed around 9 or 10 years old. And anything before that is kind of weird. It's like, I'm not sure this is me. There's some habits that are the same and stuff that reminds me of me that I can remember back, quite a bit, but it feels different. It feels like, I don't know, like I wasn't thinking the same way. Whereas after that, everything feels not only contiguous, but largely unchanging. My body's aging and I know how to do things differently and I've learned lessons, but I don't feel changed, But I feel like anything before that period, I've got, this sort of, yeah, I got memories from there, but I'm not sure that's me. That's like, it doesn't relate in quite the same way. Anyway, in that period, she was certainly reading Agatha Christie. Before that, she was reading, and I don't know if this was before I was born or when I was very, very young, but she was reading things like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and stuff, and not just Russians. What's his name? Dumas she was big on, and just all that kind of stuff. By the time I got to be, I don't know what age, let's see, it would have been about maybe 11 or somewhere around there, or 10 or 11, somewhere in that range. We ended up getting a television, and life sort of changed, in a lot of ways. Like, we had a television before that. I had a little black and white one that I used to watch. I used to watch the ball games on that we had for a little while. But I was very limited on my time, and there was no television as sort of the center of life type thing that it later became when I was around 10 or 11. And I don't know, that becoming the main form of entertainment again drove reading from her life, not from mine at that point. I've had a similar arc to my existence, which is that the internet and all the videos on that and everything have really dragged me away from reading anywhere near as much. I still read more than my mom did after a certain point, but who knows where it'll go. But by the age that I am now, she was not reading anything except like the newspaper or whatever. She'd read that with the television on or something. I don't know. Anyway, back to the book, which is what we're supposed to be discussing, not my past. The story starts becoming more disjointed. Now, I also stopped reading it as voraciously, I guess. I started reading this during an internet outage that I had, which lasted, several hours, and I got through, maybe somewhere between a third and a half the book in that time. And then, I had my usual distractions back, and it was harder to read and really enjoy in quite the same way. However, I also feel like there was about that time this sort of shift happening, a little later than it wasn't like it was immediate, right? It was like I was reading and it was still making sense and everything, and then it just started getting more and more this feeling that each author was trying to bring new things in to change what the story is, in some significant way. Now, they were trying to keep all the clues you had, and some of them are going to be red herrings, and that's life. Some of them are not really red herrings at all. I mean, they're things with explanations that are important to understand everything that happened, but are relatively innocent as well. And it kind of muddles that way for the second half of the book until you get to, there's sort of a final clearing up the mess. And who is this? This is Anthony Berkeley. Never heard of him. And I found this part very interesting. He manages to, I thought, tie everything together. The inspector comes up with this whole, structure that all seems to make sense. There can only be one person who committed at least one of the murders. There's more than one. But there's a secondary murder that only one person could have possibly committed, the way he puts it together. Well, unless people are lying, for one reason or another. But yeah, pretty much there's there's only one rational explanation that he kind of comes up with for the whole thing. And it's interesting. And then later in the same chapter, he just destroys that. Not for any reason. It's not like, oh, but no, you are wrong because of this, or anything like that. Actually, what happens is the inspector lays out his whole statement. And it's very clear there's one person who has to have done at least that second murder. And therefore, probably the first one. But then he calls the person who you're led to suspect by that and someone else in. And I think that someone else is being called in to try to trick the one person into admitting to the crimes. But then he just proceeds to go into this whole series of accusations against the person who could not possibly have done the second murder, as far as I can tell. And that guy basically admits to it. And it's like, what the fuck is going on here? And I'm left with this, I don't know if there's something more clever than I can be, like at work here, where it's like, yeah, whatever. But I mean, the inspector seemed to have it all laid out and set, and there was only one person who could have committed that second murder. And then essentially, this other guy admits to the second murder when it would be physically impossible given, the situation as described. And I'm just left with, okay, what the fuck is going on here? Because it seems like the inspector understands a certain thing, has given it out to me, I get it, and then there's this weird last twist where it's all someone else, and I'm like, no, that's not even possible. I go back and it doesn't fit his story at all. And I don't know what the hell's going on, which is very, very disappointing. It's funny, they've got little snippets somewhere. I don't remember where they are. From from different reviewers or whatever. And some of them seem reasonable. Things like, at first glance, this book would seem to be merely a literary stunt. Yeah, it kind of does. But it turns out to be a really good mystery. Yeah, I don't know about that. And that's from New York Times book review. Here's another one from a different author, from a different reviewer from the New York Times. An old style whodunit. What makes this work distinctive is that it is a group effort and a very successful one at that. Those all sound reasonable. The one that I found particularly interesting, Jesus, this is not, maybe I found something online. that was like a reviewer's thing, because I'm not seeing the one I expected to see. Now, maybe I misread it as well, but I read it to the extent of, and the ending actually works, or something like that. I'm like, okay, that's pretty faint praise when it comes down to a whodunit type thing. Honestly, I can't suggest it for, if you're a fan of murder mystery type stuff, I can't suggest it as this wonderful exemplar of either writing nor of particularly of giving you a nice whodunit type situation. It's okay until you get to that ending, and then that's like it just drops off, and it's like I lost all belief with the ending, and not like there's no explanation, there's no mystery thing that is just cleared up, and it's like, well, that's hard to believe. No, it's just like it's as if the author just forgot what he was doing, or decided to put a twist in and didn't clean it up properly and make it work, whatever. And I suspect it's because there was maybe a feeling of positive feelings somewhat built up about the character who would have been the murderer. I've got to swap batteries, so hold on. What's really funny is essentially what happens is that the author basically, of that last section, I'm pretty sure it was of the last section, basically clears the person he's going to eventually nail with the crime, and makes it pretty clear that the couple pieces of evidence that kind of lead towards him were planted. But then goes back on that as well as this, just taking this total impossibility. It's also, he nails it to a character who is barely present in the book. In terms of being investigated, in terms of showing up anywhere, in terms of having much to do with anything. He seems to always be like, he's someone who's in the periphery of the story and definitely should play a bigger role than he does. It's like nobody's really dealt with him, but then somehow he just gets all tied into this in a crazy sort of way, when everything would have worked just fine if they hadn't gone to the confrontation scene and played it out the way it was. That whole section just feels like it doesn't even work. And anyway, after the book is done, there's appendices where most of the authors, not all of them, the first couple don't have any solution at all written, but most of the other authors give a series of solutions, who they thought did it based on what they've put together and where they were aiming the story. And that's kind of interesting to read. It would be, I guess, more exciting. I don't know, it's hard to tell, because it's kind of like by the time you get there, you have to kind of unremember a lot of stuff. But on the other hand, by the time, you wouldn't want these clues of what one of the authors thinks is going on ahead of time. Although some of them might be right enough. What's funny, now the last guy I don't think writes one, because he gives you the ending. But I think the second to last it is. Let me just take a look here. Yeah, the second to last ends his. Let's see what we got here. So I've gone to ground that they are two perfectly innocent people and that all the evidence that points to them is purely accidental. These are the ones the story most kind of points to. I am frankly in a complete muddle as to what has happened and have tried to write a chapter that anybody can use to prove anything they like. This is the second to last. And to me, that's kind of like, yeah, you kind of broke the game there, man. It's just kind of fucked up. But anyway. What... Again, it's not that exciting in terms of, how it ends up reading. And some of the authors are more enjoyable to read than others, just in terms of the authorship. Like the one, the 39 Articles of Doubt, is literally just a list of these things and discussions as extracted from the book, which is kind of an interesting technique to put in the book. The investigator or the inspector putting together his ideas and spelling out all his thoughts and lines of inquiry that still have to be made and stuff like that. It also kind of doesn't really feel like, he's progressing the plot at all. He's doing a piece of work that is nice to have inside the book. It kind of spells out and focuses your mind on all these different issues in a kind of neat way that puts things into perspective, but doesn't really tell any story anymore. It's definitely one that's going back up into the little libraries, but it is kind of cute what was attempted here, and it's pretty obvious why it sat around for 50 years before actually getting republished. Reading, say, I don't know, an Agatha Christie novel of the time or whatever. It's very much of a time, and it's of an early time for her novels, at least, in the sense that, like, I get the feeling most of the stuff that I've read of hers comes in the post-war period, and this is significantly earlier in era. So there's just something intriguing about it in terms of that, and just, I don't know, kind of an interesting slice of something to have looked at. I did enjoy the first bit of it. It does present an interesting problem, but one which, even though they go into descriptions of the tides and how they operate and whatnot, some of the clues, some of the facets in it are a little hard to keep in mind when you start trying to puzzle out what the hell is actually going on. And other stuff is just like, well, but yeah, they threw the knife overboard or something like that. A lot of them chose that just as that wasn't the actual murder weapon. Just weird shit like that. That's like interesting. Depending on where it happens, that's kind of the way it ends up going in terms of a story. Anyway, I thought I'd cover this because I was kind of excited about it to begin with.